Hello London, we are ready for your vote.
Hello, I'm Stephen Perkins, and this is Douze Pois, the Eurovision podcast from the team behind Binge Watch. It is Monday, 25th of November, and I'm actually going to open this episode with an apology. Regular listeners will likely have noticed that we were due to release an episode last Monday, and it didn't materialise. Now, there's a very simple reason for that. Basically, I've been having some building work done, and it was both more complicated and a much longer process than I expected it was going to be, so I didn't have time or access to my equipment when I needed it last weekend. So that's why this episode is a week late. I hope you didn't miss us too much, and thank you very much for your patience. As always, let's open the episode with a little look at some of the news that's been happening in the Eurovision sphere over the past 3 weeks. First of all, I think we can breathe a sigh of relief that an attempt to block the staging of Eurovision in Basel in 2025 has failed. The Christian Conservative Federal Democratic Union Party in Switzerland gathered enough signatures to force a vote among locals, stating that the contest was blasphemy and using the campaign slogan, "No taxpayer money for woke propaganda." Exact details of the vote haven't been fully released yet, but it is believed that 66% of voters cast their ballots in favour of the contest going ahead, so we can all look forward to our favourite woke propaganda fest taking place in May as planned. Elsewhere, after delaying their decision on whether to take part in next year's contest at all, Dutch broadcaster Avrotros has revealed that they have had 331 songs submitted as potential entries for Eurovision 2025. These entries will all be listened to by the selection committee, who will draw up a short list of acts who will be invited to come and perform live for them before ultimately selecting one song to represent the Netherlands in Switzerland next year. Interestingly, the broadcaster has also announced that the submission window for the 2026 contest will open on 1st of August 2025, making the Netherlands the first nation so far to state their intention to participate in 2 years' time. Finally, it looks like we may soon have a new entry to the franchise, with the news that Eurovision Song Contest Latin America is closer to becoming a reality. A Latin American Eurovision was first proposed back in 2022, and meetings were held this year on 17th of October about the possibility of Chile being the first nation to host the contest. Obviously, there are still a lot of details to be ironed out, and it may yet come to nothing, but we'll be keeping an eye on the proceedings and will update you when there's more news. The other big event of the last 3 weeks was, of course, Junior Eurovision 2024, which was held in Madrid on 16th of November, making it the first Junior Eurovision to be held on a Saturday since 2015. So, while this is a little bit later than I intended to be doing this, let's devote the rest of this episode to a review of everything that went down at this year's youth-focused spin-off. The first thing I should probably admit is that I wasn't able to watch the event live this year. Due to the aforementioned building works, I was busy vacuuming up plaster dust and trying to move furniture from one room to another when the contest was being held, so I ended up having to watch it a week later on YouTube. I wouldn't recommend that as an experience to anyone who's thinking of trying it, not just because I was spoiled for the result by the time I saw it, but also because the YouTube stream of the contest has ads spliced throughout at entirely random intervals. I'm not anti-advertising by any means, and I know they have to make money to fund this incredibly expensive competition, but you might think they'd at least take the time to ensure that the ads were placed during natural breaks in the competition and not, for example, slap bang in the middle of some of the songs, including the winner's reprise. I mean, come on now, that's just amateur hour. Anyway, I'm going to assume that not everybody who listens to this podcast follows Junior Eurovision that intently, so let's quickly remind ourselves how we got here. Last year's competition was held in Nice, following Lisandro's victory for France in 2022 with Oh Maman, and ended up being won on home turf by France's Zoe Clauzure with Cœur. However, as France had already hosted Junior Eurovision in 2021 and 2023, not to mention the fact that they already had the expense of hosting the Olympics in 2024, they declined the opportunity to host this year's competition, saying that they didn't want to create the impression of having a monopoly on the contest. Since Spain were the runners-up last year with Love You by Sandra Valero, they stepped up to host on France's behalf, making it the first time that they had hosted Junior Eurovision and the first time that Spain had hosted any kind of Eurovision since 1969. Sadly, despite returning to the competition in 2022 and racking up 2 top 5 finishes, the United Kingdom declined to return to the contest this year, a decision that, depending on which sources you listen to, was either driven by disappointingly low broadcast audiences for the competition, the fact that the competition was held on a Saturday rather than a Sunday this year, or perhaps a combination of both. However, our absence was offset by the return of 2 other countries, Cyprus, who participated for the first time since 2017, and San Marino, back for the first time since 2015, leaving us with a total of 17 countries competing: Albania, Armenia, Cyprus, Estonia, France, Georgia, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Malta, the Netherlands, North Macedonia, Poland, Portugal, San Marino, Spain, and Ukraine. Looking back at the contest as a whole, I would say it was a little bit wobbly in terms of the overall presentation. It was hosted by Ruth Lorenzo, formerly of the X Factor fame in the UK, as well as being Spain's Eurovision representative back in 2014, actor and model Marc Clotet, and Melanie Garcia, who represented Spain at Junior Eurovision in 2019. And as a trio, I'm not sure they ever particularly gelled together that well. Ruth seemed the most natural and relaxed of the three on camera, but even she struggled during some of the more spontaneous, off-the-cuff moments of the contest, like when the results were coming in. There was also one very strange moment in the run-up to North Macedonia's performance, where we got 99% of their introductory postcard before the producers cut to Ruth in the green room, telling us how the artists were all singing each other's songs and how much she loved them all, before personally introducing North Macedonia and the song intro card showing up on the screen. So I can only assume there was some kind of delay on stage and they'd had to frantically fill for time, but it definitely looked a bit strange. I do think hosting Junior Eurovision is quite a tricky gig because you do have to make it kid-friendly without being patronising. But I think France did a very good job of walking that line last year, and I think unfortunately this year Spain veered a little more on the side of being condescending. It wasn't unforgivably bad, but it did just feel a little bit jarring in places. And speaking of things that were a bit jarring, obviously the elephant in the room as far as this year's contest goes is the use of AI in the contestant postcards. Each postcard was a combination of shots of the artist doing normal kid things and AI-generated animations of them in some kind of imaginary scenario. The AI felt grating for a number of reasons. For one, it was often a poor match for the kids' actual skin tones, which felt like a fairly serious misstep. For another, it just largely felt unnecessary. There were some occasions where it showed the kids doing something truly extraordinary, like Leo from Armenia going on a spacewalk, but other times it was just showing Maria from Cyprus walking through a meadow, something that she could have done for herself without needing AI at all. The animations also often felt quite pedestrian and lifeless, and I was never more aware of how wasteful they felt than when Bjarne from Germany was singing his song about how we should all save the planet so the kids of today can still enjoy it in the future, and all I could think of was how much environmental destruction had been wrought in the creation of those animations to frankly negligible effect. Anyway, let's talk about the competition itself. I think one thing that I particularly enjoyed was that it felt like a palate cleanser after the tension and hostilities of Malmö earlier this year, in that the competition seemed to be absolutely geared towards everyone having the best time and being really proud of participating, whatever the result. I think, on balance, the quality of the songs wasn't as good as it was last year, and I think from a zeitgeist point of view, it was no accident that so many of the songs were conspicuously of the make the world a better place for everyone variety, but I was pleased that there were some straightforward pop bops in there as well. I was a big fan of North Macedonia's Marathon, even if the voters weren't so much, and the cheerful sassiness of Como la Lola by Spain's Chloe de Rosa was a welcome respite, and Music by Stay Tuned from the Netherlands had a slight Something New by Girls Aloud vibe to it, which I really enjoyed, and I think that was probably the strongest of the pop bunch this year. However, for me, the absolute standout of all the entries was Portugal's Esperança by Victoria Nicole, which felt head and shoulders above the other entries in terms of poise, professionalism and talent. I genuinely felt like this one was of the sort of standard that really wouldn't have looked out of place in the main Eurovision event. And if anyone's wondering which performances I didn't like, well, that much I'm keeping to myself because I don't want to be sit here on this podcast criticising actual children. The other area that I do just want to spend a little bit of time discussing here was the voting reveal. For those who didn't watch it, it was handled a little bit differently this time. Rather than going country to country and handing out the scores in turn, they instead grouped all of the point classifications together. So, we started by seeing all of the 1 points awarded by the various juries announced at once, then all of the 2s, all of the 3s, all of the 4s, and so on, all the way up to 10 points. There was a big bar chart on the screen keeping track of everyone's totals, and the scores floated out in little spheres, like a big game of puzzle bobble. Now, in the interest of being fair here, I gather the producers did have their hands slightly forced. The Saturday time slot meant that they did have to keep the event capped at 2 hours, and they had to claw back some time somewhere in the running order, and this, I suppose, felt like the most obvious place to do it. It certainly was a lot quicker to do it this way, but honestly, as a viewer, it just felt chaotic and confusing. Most of the time it was borderline impossible to see who'd received which points from whom, and also it just felt quite misleading in the way it all worked out. When all of the 7 points were revealed, Georgia was still on 0, so it looked like they had done terribly, and by the time we got to the point where all of the 10s had been revealed, France was in the lead, with Ukraine in second, and Portugal in third. Only at that point did we finally go to each individual country as a young representative from each nation announced who had received their maximum 12 points. And this was when Georgia got top points from 12 of the 17 countries, catapulting them into first place by a margin of 58 points. Now, obviously the producers couldn't have known this was going to happen when they planned the section this way, but just hearing lots of different people say Georgia over and over again got quite boring quite quickly, and I can't imagine it was that much fun for the kids who were in the lead prior to the 12s being announced, suddenly seeing themselves being rapidly overtaken like that. In all honesty, I don't think we're likely to see this system being adopted by the adult contest, and in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see it again at Junior Eurovision. It was just too messy, too hard to follow, and really not that exciting. Thankfully, the reveal of the online vote was done in a much more conventional fashion, just going up the jury scoreboard from bottom to top, revealing each individual country's total tally of points from the online vote. This was, I would say, a little bit more evenly spread between the individual countries, and Portugal were the ones who won overall with 117 points, but that wasn't enough to make up the necessary ground on Georgia's massive lead with the juries, and despite Georgia finishing 6th in the online vote with 59 points, they were still 26 points ahead of Portugal in first place on the combined scoreboard, making Andrea Puccarazzi the winner of Junior Eurovision 2024. Even though I was rooting for Portugal, I'm fine with Georgia as a winner. Andrea is clearly a very talented singer, and the song was exceptionally well constructed to appeal to juries, and this win, Georgia's 4th overall, makes them the most successful country at Junior Eurovision in terms of outright wins. They have, however, only hosted the contest once so far, back in 2017. The Georgian public broadcaster has already stated their willingness to host next year, but the EBU itself has yet to confirm which nation will be hosting. Even though it might not have been quite as slick as last year's event, I still think that Junior Eurovision 2024 went well overall, and I'm constantly amazed at the maturity and professionalism of the young artists who take part. Now we just have to watch this space for news of the competition for 2025, including whether the UK might make a return, or whether we are in fact gone from it for the foreseeable future. That's it for this episode, short and sweet, just like Junior Eurovision itself. As it's a little bit difficult for me to commit to a regular release schedule right now with everything that's going on in my life, I've decided to make this our 2024 finale, so this will be us going on hiatus now until January. Obviously, if there is a big breaking news story, we will be here, and we're definitely excited to come back in the new year to follow the national final season. I really hope you will come back and join us for all of that. Please do make sure in the meantime that you hit subscribe on your podcast platform of choice if you haven't done so already, so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We are still on Twitter, for now at least, at bingewatch_pod, but subscribing is definitely your best bet to make sure that you keep up to date with everything that we've got coming up in the future. Thank you so much for your support this year, because we couldn't, and indeed wouldn't, do it without all of you who take the time to listen, and we're very, very excited to see what craziness and catchiness lies ahead for us once the songs for Eurovision 2025 start to roll in. So, until next time, good night Europe and good morning Australia.